I arrived on Thanksgiving morning carrying a casserole dish wrapped in foil like it was gold. I knocked, the door opened, and the room full of family brightened with the smell of turkey and sweet potatoes. Tracy, my sister-in-law, saw me and laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oh, good. The maid's here," she said like it was a joke. Laughter followed like a wave. My cheeks burned. My hands tightened around the casserole. I remembered Luke whispering as we came up the porch, "Just let it go." I nodded because I loved him, and because I wanted the day to be easy for him. But the words cut me in a spot that was still sore from other small cuts I had let sit. I felt very small in my simple sweater and plain shoes. People looked at me with a kind of curiosity that felt like judgment. I set the casserole on the counter carefully, hands steadying, and said, "Happy Thanksgiving." My voice was quiet. I watched as plates were passed and hugs were given. People asked Luke about work and the kids. No one asked me how I was. I kept my smile because my mother taught me to be polite. My mind moved faster than my face. I counted details like a list I would need later, the way Joan folded her napkin, the creak by the stairs, who sat near the window. I wrote the moment down in my head like a photograph. Inside, I was a pool of cool water measuring depth. I waited for Luke to say something about Tracy's joke. He took another forkful of dressing and shrugged. The room filled with jokes about old family stories and canned cranberry sauce. I kept my hands folded by my side like I was holding a secret. Part of me wanted to speak up, to correct them, to say who I truly was. But another part knew this was not the time to start an argument. So I stayed quiet, noting every small cruelty as if I were collecting coins. If you think she deserved it, hit subscribe for more true revenge stories. I stood by the counter and forced a smile while the family moved around me. Tracy kept making small, cutting jokes that landed with claps from others. She brought food. "How adorable," she said, loud and bright, like she was showing off. My hands trembled when I reached for a serving spoon. I still said, "Happy Thanksgiving," and sounded like I was reading from a card. I wanted to cry, but I did not. I thought of all the times I had stayed quiet to keep peace. My silence felt like a shield I had worn so long it had left marks. People watched the football game and talked about old neighbors. My husband, Luke, sat beside his mother and laughed easy. He held my hand under the table once and squeezed. I guessed he wanted me to stop feeling bad. I nodded to him because he loved me, and because he thought that was enough. The room felt warm and loud, but inside I was alert, like a fox hearing every footstep. I watched Tracy as she told a story about someone who had once been clumsy. Everyone laughed and pointed. No one thought to ask how hard it was to arrive as a new wife into a house with old rules. I washed dishes later, hands in warm water, alone in the kitchen while laughter drifted from the living room. Tracy came in and leaned against the counter, her voice soft but sharp. "She's a keeper, Luke cleans like a pro," she said with a sly smile. Luke smiled in that embarrassed way men do when they do not know what to say. I held the plate and let the soap foam up, feeling its small bite. I did not answer. I kept my silence because I wanted to measure them all, to see how far they would go. That night, alone in the car, I made a plan in small steps. Each small thing I collected would be needed. I would not speak too soon. I would not ruin my chance. I learned long ago that quiet is a slow kind of power. Joan, my mother-in-law, gave me one of those looks that slides like cold air across skin. She said, at least she dressed modestly, loud enough for the table to hear. The words fell like a plate being set with too much force. I held my napkin and tried to keep the back of my hand from shaking. Modest. Like my sweater marked me on the outside. Like a tag. I kept my eyes level and told myself to be calm. I was new in this family and wanted to be fair. I had not told them everything about who I was. I had never wanted to make anyone feel small. But I also had a job I had kept from them because it belonged to a part of my life I had not yet wished to share. As the conversations drifted, I watched Joan's hands move when she spoke. There was little soft flourishes that showed she felt at home, at the head of the table. I wrote down how she arranged the bread basket, and who reached first for the gravy. The more I watched, the more I saw patterns of how people kept power in that house. I saw the way they laughed together, and how they left me just outside the circle. After dinner, plates stacked like small towers, I asked Luke about cleaning up. He shrugged and said, "We'll do it later." I stayed to wash dishes alone because I wanted to be useful. The room smelled of lemon cleaner and roast. As I scrubbed, I heard Tracy's voice drift in with stories about the charity she helped run, and the places she had visited. She spoke with the type of easy name-dropping that makes people feel small without hitting them hard. I felt the sting, but I also sat with a quiet sense of watching. I decided that nights like this would not have power over me forever. I kept my hands in the warm suds, feeling the burn of the soap, and thought, watch, learn, wait. I made a small list in my mind of what I would do next, and how I would let the moment come naturally. I would not let anger make me clumsy. I stayed quiet at the kitchen sink while voices braided through the house. The air smelled like turkey and cinnamon. Tracy came close while I scrubbed a pan. She winked at Luke, then turned toward me with that smile that tries to be friendly but lands sharp. "She's a keeper, Luke cleans like a pro," she said. The words were soft, but a line of ice formed along my spine. I rinsed the pan slowly and answered nothing. My silence was a kind of fire, hot and patient. Luke shifted on his feet, and looked guilty, like a man watching two sides of a picture, and not sure which to pick. He gave me a small squeeze of my hand under the table later, like a quarterback signaling to his team. It made me feel both loved and alone. I thought of the ways we let small things go to keep the peace. I thought about my mother when she told me, "You do not owe people your dignity for their comfort." That line stayed with me. I kept my face calm, my voice steady, and I watched. After the meal, I found a quiet corner and wrote on my phone. I wrote the exact words they used, the tone, the laugh. I saved it like a ledger. There was also a part of me that wanted to say everything, to tell them I owned more than they would ever know. But I also wanted to wait until it mattered. My plan was to be slow like a tide. I learned how to be invisible when it suited me. I folded napkins later in my mind the way Joan folded them on the table. I learned their habits and how the house was held together by small rituals. When I lay awake that night, I thought about buying time. I thought about the day I would stand at the center of that house, and not be overlooked. The quiet was no longer only for keeping peace. It was a tool. I decided then that I would not let a single insult be the anchor that held me back. I had a secret I kept like a small bird in my pocket. People think secrets weigh you down, but some secrets are like wings. I had bought up homes in the area quietly, one by one, like someone planting seeds for a garden I would later walk through. I had been working in customer service at a call center as a front. That was the story I told when people asked. It was safe and small. They liked that version of me because it fit some story they had about who I should be. In truth, I owned a small property development company. I started it with saved paychecks and a small loan, buying houses that landlords had let fall into disrepair. I fixed them up and rented them to families who needed a safe place. I never boasted. I did not like loud praise. I worked late at night, looking at blueprints and leasing agreements, learning names of contractors like they were my math tables. The company grew slowly and quietly. I never named it after myself. I chose a name that sounded kind and neutral. No one in my new family knew. Luke thought I was helping him with small savings, and that my job was late shifts. He liked the easy version. I liked that he could not see everything I did because then there would be pressure to explain. I kept my work separate. But I also kept a list of the houses that were near his family's street. I watched the house where Joan and Tracy lived from afar sometimes, taking notes like an architect learning a wall. I did not plan revenge at first. I simply wanted to build a life that was mine and safe. When I saw Joan struggling with bills and small repairs, I felt a tug. I bought the first property because someone needed a kind landlord who would fix the heat. Little by little, that tug became a plan. I wanted to make sure no family like mine would ever be at the mercy of careless landlords. I told myself it was for a good reason. But I knew, too, that the day would come to set a boundary where people had laughed at me. I checked my phone alone in the bathroom later that week. My lawyer had sent a message, transfer complete. Property officially in your name. I felt a small thrill like the one you get the first time you put your name on something that matters. The message was simple. It said all the things that could not be spoken at the dinner table. My plans had reached a quiet turn. The timing felt right. I sat on the closed lid and breathed in and out like I had just climbed a set of stairs. I remembered other times I had wanted to tell them and didn't. I remembered wanting Luke to stand up for me and him choosing quiet instead. I thought of Joan and Tracy's jokes and the way their laughter had sounded like a guardrail keeping me at a distance. Now the ownership papers sat in a folder in my lawyer's office. The transfer made the house mine in a legal way, not cruelly but firmly. This was the kind of power that did not shout. It did not need to. It was a line in a document that changed the shape of a room. I rinsed my hands and dried them slowly. The sound of dishes in the sink somewhere downstairs felt far away. I put the phone back in my pocket and walked out to the living room where the family watched TV. No one noticed my quiet smile. Tracy told another joke like it would make the walls small and comfortable. I sat on the couch and laughed like it was normal. Inside, I had made a choice. I had decided I would not allow myself to be small for other people's comfort. The law had become a small tool in my hand. I did not plan to show it like a weapon. I planned to use it like a key. At dinner, Joan stood to make a toast about family and hard work. Her voice was strong, but the words had a light jab to them. To family, and to hard work, which some of us know more about than others. There was laughter around the table. It sounded like someone dropping pebbles into a pond and waiting for ripples. I lifted my glass with both hands and said nothing out loud. In my head I said, to clarity. I watched people smile at each other, a group that shared the same view like a secret handshake. The food was good, and the conversation was ordinary, full of small complaints about weather and old neighbors. I thought of how easily people say true things that sound like jokes, and how those little truths can cut. I swallowed and felt the wine warm my throat. I did not stand up to correct them. I had learned that truth said at the wrong time can feel like a tantrum. I waited because timing was part of what would make the moment matter. That night, I went to the car while the house hummed with old jokes. Luke walked me to the porch and kissed my cheek. He said, "I love you," like it was a patch over a hole. I wanted to tell him everything, but I also wanted this to be my choice. I wanted it to be my moment on my terms. I drove home thinking of what small facts I had collected, and how I would turn them into a path. I knew I would not be cruel for cruelty's sake. I wanted to be right and fair and also firm. I made plans in my head like a map. The transfer paper was a point on that map. The next step would be to wait just enough. I felt the strange calm of someone who holds a key and knows when to open the door. 6 months earlier was a blur of quiet deals and small checks. I bought the mortgage company stake after I saw their notices piling at Joan's front step, and learned how they charged late fees like a slow leak. At the time, I did not plan to use ownership against family. I bought the company because I wanted to stop families from losing houses to cold paperwork and greedy fees. I wanted to be the kind of landlord who fixed leaky roofs and warmed houses in winter. I did not want revenge. I wanted fairness. But sometimes life turns plans into other shapes. I started by paying off a small mortgage and fixing the porch swing. I made sure tenants had safe locks and good heat. People thanked me quietly. The company grew the same way. I took small steps, bought small pieces of the neighborhood, and repaired them. The bank did not expect me to be patient. The work was slow and the returns were also small at first. I learned contracts and leases the way a baker learns recipes. I kept my name out of it because names can make people proud or spiteful. I wanted my work to be known for what it did, not for who owned it. But when I saw Joan's house paperwork and the notice about unpaid dues, my stomach tightened in a way that did not feel like anger. It felt like a responsibility. The same papers that could take a house from a family could also keep it safe if someone kind held them. I bought that stake and began to protect houses in small ways. The work changed me. I listened to tenants' stories and learned where they hurt. Later, when Tracy joked about the maid at the table, the memory of doors and forms and old bills joined with the joke to make a new plan. I did not want to hurt them, but I also would not let old jokes define me. I let that truth settle like flour on a table ready for bread. Later that same Thanksgiving, I stepped into the kitchen for a breath of air and found Tracy on the phone. She didn't see me at first. I told Luke to marry up, she said, her voice light and cruel. Guess he took it literally, from the cleaning crew. Her friend laughed through the speaker. I froze behind the half-closed door, my hand still on the counter. The sound of her laughter landed like a slap. She hung up, still grinning, and turned just enough to see me standing there. Her smile faltered. "Oh, I didn't mean," she began. I lifted my chin. "Yes, you did." I walked past her to the sink, rinsed my glass slowly, and left her standing in the doorway with no place for her words to hide. My heart raced the way it does before a storm, full of bright, sharp air. I sat in the car later while Luke loaded leftovers into the back seat. I wanted to tell him what I heard, but I didn't. He already knew what kind of things his sister said. He always pretended not to. As we drove home, I watched the lights of houses blur together through the window, and thought how strange it was to be mocked for work that builds homes when others only live in them. I thought about power, not the loud kind that brags at tables, but the quiet kind that signs papers in private. I had that kind now. I would use it when the time was right. I tucked Tracy's words in my mind like a note under glass, to be remembered when I needed the strength to stop smiling. That night, Luke sat at the edge of our bed while I brushed my hair. "You know my family just jokes that way," he said. "They didn't mean anything by it." I looked at him in the mirror. "They're not joking," I said softly. "They're measuring me." He sighed and rubbed his temples. "If you just ignore them, it'll pass." "It's not supposed to pass," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "It's supposed to teach them they can say anything." He didn't answer. He just turned off the lamp and rolled over. I lay awake beside him, listening to the ceiling fan turn. I felt the ache of being married to someone who could see my pain, and still call it an overreaction. I told myself I loved him, and I did, but love without respect is like a house with pretty walls and no foundation. I reached for my phone and opened my notes app. At the top of a blank page I typed, "Never explain yourself to people who enjoy misunderstanding you." Then I wrote another line, "Every insult is a brick. Build with it." My eyes burned from tiredness, but my mind was awake, building walls, blueprints, possibilities. I knew one thing clearly: I wouldn't wait for Luke to defend me anymore. I would do that myself. The next morning, I made coffee and sat at the table while sunlight slid across the floor. I stared at my note from the night before and added another line, "Don't argue. Document." I opened my email and wrote to my lawyer, "Please prepare tenant meeting notice for the Jenkins property." The Jenkinses were my newest tenants, kind people but months behind on rent because of bad management by the old landlord. It was a simple message, business as usual. But it reminded me that I had power beyond what people in Luke's family could see. I looked at our wedding photo on the fridge and tried to remember what I'd wanted from this marriage. Maybe it was belonging. Maybe it was respect. I wanted both, but one had to come first. Tracy sent a text in the family group chat about how Elena makes the best casserole for a beginner. I stared at the screen and typed nothing. I realized silence, used right, can feel like armor. Then I looked at the lease folder I kept in my desk. On top was Joan's address. I hadn't planned to include her property in my portfolio when I first started buying homes. But now, seeing how she treated me, I thought of something else. If she could mock me while living in a home owned by others, what would she do when she learned one day that I was the one who owned hers? The thought didn't feel cruel, it felt balanced. A week later, Joan called a family breakfast meeting. She loved being in charge. As she poured orange juice, she said proudly, "We've decided to host Christmas this year too. It's tradition." Everyone nodded. I smiled across the table and said, "Let's see if you'll still have the house by then." The word slipped out wrapped in sugar, quiet enough to sound like teasing. No one caught the meaning. Luke nudged me under the table. "Play nice," he murmured. I stirred my coffee and watched the light dance on the spoon. I thought about how life sometimes gives you the script first and the power to rewrite it later. They still thought I was small, harmless, polite. They didn't see the way the tide was already turning under them. That evening, I called my lawyer and asked about transferring the deed title on one more property, Joan's. He confirmed it was possible. The paperwork had been in motion since the bank started selling debt packages. "We can finalize it by mid-December," he said. I thanked him and hung up. I walked to the window and watched rain slide down the glass. My reflection looked calm, but inside I was a storm gathering quietly, steady and certain. I whispered to myself, "You don't take revenge with fire. You take it with patience." 2 weeks later, a cream envelope arrived at Joan's door marked "Notice of Change in Ownership." The letterhead read Davenport Holdings, LLC. I knew that name well, it was mine. The letter was simple, effective immediately, "Please direct rent payments to E. Davenport, LLC." Joan called Luke, furious. Some new company bought the mortgage. They'll regret it if they raise the rent. Tracy chimed in from the background, "We'll fight it." I listened from across the kitchen as Luke tried to calm them. "Mom, it's just paperwork. You'll figure it out." I pretended to stir soup, hiding a smile. That same night, Joan and Tracy tried to look up Davenport Holdings. They found nothing: private filings, confidential ownership, layers of paper meant to protect me from exactly this. Tracy grew frustrated. "Whoever this woman is, she's greedy. I bet she's rich and cruel." Luke looked uneasy, and I just said, "Maybe she has her reasons." Inside, I thought, I do. Days passed, and I kept my silence while small storms brewed inside their house. Tracy tried searching more, even asking a realtor friend who came up empty. "This Davenport person is invisible," she said. I smiled over my morning coffee. Power feels different when it's quiet. It doesn't roar, it hums. I spent my afternoons reviewing repair plans and approving maintenance requests. I told my property manager to inspect Joan's house before the holidays. "We need to make sure it's safe," I said. She didn't know who lived there, none of my staff did. The reports came back that the property was fine, small roof repairs, nothing urgent. But the timing mattered. Christmas lights would twinkle on that same roof soon. I wanted to see their faces when they realized who held their home in her name. I wasn't trying to ruin them. I wanted them to learn what respect costs when you've spent your life thinking other people owe it to you. At night, Luke lay beside me scrolling his phone, reading Tracy's posts complaining about the new landlord. He sighed. "My sister's dramatic." I murmured, "Maybe she's about to learn something about humility." He didn't ask what I meant. The next Thanksgiving invitation came a year later. "Please come," Joan said on the phone, her voice tight. "Family's family." I accepted politely. Luke looked uneasy. "Just, don't start anything," he said. I smiled and kissed his cheek. "I won't start anything. I'll finish it." That morning, I dressed in a cream blouse and gold earrings, simple, elegant. The sky was cold and clear. I carried a pie instead of a casserole this time. When we arrived, I saw the strain already written on Joan's face. The rent had gone up slightly, nothing cruel, just enough to match the market. They blamed that greedy landlord for their tight budget. I stepped inside, calm, collected. Tracy greeted me with her bright fake cheer. "Well, look who's back. Maybe this year you can help clean again." I smiled thinly. "I might surprise you." She laughed, thinking it was harmless banter. Inside, I felt the slow rise of victory, not loud but steady, like the tide returning to the shore. Dinner began with tension thick as gravy. Joan complained about the new rent increase. "This woman, Davenport something, is bleeding us dry," she said, waving her fork. "I swear she's heartless." Tracy nodded eagerly. "Some people don't deserve money. They just get lucky." I poured wine for everyone, moving slowly so I could look each of them in the eye. "I'm sure she has her reasons," I said softly. Tracy laughed. "Maybe she needs it for her cleaning supplies." Everyone chuckled again. Luke winced but said nothing. I took a sip of my wine and smiled. The thing about being underestimated is how much it teaches you patience. They didn't know the papers on my desk held their signatures, their receipts, their history. The irony almost made me laugh. The sound of the mail truck outside interrupted us. The doorbell rang, and Joan went to get it. A minute later, she returned holding an envelope from the property office, brow furrowed. "It's a certified letter for current tenants." Tracy rolled her eyes. "Probably junk." But Joan opened it anyway. Her lips parted as she read. "Meeting with property owner required. Tomorrow morning." She looked pale. "They're threatening to end our lease." I covered my mouth lightly in mock shock. "Oh, that's terrible," I said. "You should be prepared. Some landlords can be quite heartless." The next morning, the house felt like it was holding its breath. I arrived early with Luke, who looked nervous the whole drive. Tracy had already started her day's show. "Not everyone's meant to own property," she said, arranging flowers like she was on television. "Some of us just contribute in smaller ways." Her voice floated with sugar but landed with salt. I smiled. Like gossip. The silence that followed could have been cut with the carving knife. Joan blinked fast, her mouth opening and closing like a clock that forgot its rhythm. Tracy tried to laugh. "Oh, Elena, always so serious." I shrugged and poured myself orange juice. Luke whispered, "Why would you say that?" I said softly, "Because sometimes people only understand mirrors." The tension clung to the air like humidity before a storm. I helped set the table, folding napkins with precision, watching Tracy's nervous glances. She didn't know that by tomorrow, her laughter would be gone. That afternoon, I called my lawyer to confirm the meeting. "They'll come, right?" he asked. "They'll come," I said, my voice calm. "They always show up when they think they're about to win." That night, I barely slept. I kept picturing their faces when they finally saw the truth. My revenge wasn't fire and shouting. It was paper, ink, and patience. Thanksgiving Day again, 1 year later to the hour since I first walked into that house, and was called the Maid. I watched Joan carve the turkey with shaking hands while Tracy scrolled her phone, muttering about rent notices. The doorbell rang again. The mailman stood there holding another certified letter. Joan thanked him, confused, and tore it open. I kept my face still. She gasped. "It's another notice, from the property owner." Tracy grabbed it and read aloud, "Reminder, meeting with management tomorrow. Attendance required." The room filled with anxious whispers. Luke frowned. "That's bad timing." Joan groaned, "Who holds meetings on Thanksgiving week?" "Some greedy woman trying to scare us." I nodded sympathetically. "You should come prepared. Some landlords are heartless." The irony almost made me laugh. Tracy slammed the letter onto the counter. If she thinks she can push us around, she's wrong. I smiled faintly. Let's hope she's reasonable. I stood, smoothed my skirt, and helped clear plates. No one noticed the glint in my eyes. The timing was perfect. Tomorrow, while they expected to meet a stranger, they'd meet me. My plan was not cruelty, it was correction. That night, I lay awake beside Luke. He didn't know about the meeting. They're really upset, he said. Mom's talking about suing that landlord. I turned my head and whispered, maybe the landlord just wants respect. He frowned. You sound like you know her. I smiled into the dark. Maybe I do. I thought about the first time I saw the deed with Joan's name, and the loan company's red stamp. I thought of every moment since, each insult, each look, each silence I'd swallowed. Tomorrow would not be rage. It would be release. I closed my eyes and rehearsed how I'd walk into that room, how I'd sit calmly while they realized everything they had mocked stood quietly behind the very walls they lived in. I imagined Tracy's smirk fading, Joan's posture shrinking. Not because I wanted them to hurt, but because I wanted them to see. Respect is not something you demand with pedigree, it's something you earn with kindness. When sleep finally came, it felt like the soft weight of closure waiting at the door. The next morning, Joan and Tracy arrived at the property office 30 minutes early. They were dressed in stiff jackets, faces tight with anger. They expected a fight. The receptionist smiled politely and ushered them into the conference room. On the table sat a neat nameplate, E. Davenport owner. Joan frowned. She must be late. Tracy crossed her arms. Typical. I stepped through the doorway a moment later, a folder in my hand, and closed the door behind me. Both women turned, color draining from their faces. You, Tracy started. I sat down calmly. Good morning. I heard you had some concerns about your landlord. Joan stammered, you're Davenport. I nodded. Elena Davenport Woods. My business name, actually. I thought it was time we met in person. Silence. Only the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights filled the room. I set the folder on the table. I understand you've had trouble with the rent schedule. Let's discuss it. Tracy's face twisted. You bought our house. I smiled softly. Actually, I own the whole block. The silence stretched until it snapped. Joan's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. You could have told us, she blurted. I tilted my head. And miss your jokes about the maid. Never. Tracy slammed her purse onto the table. This is insane. You can't just, I can, I said gently, sliding the papers across to them. Here are your updated lease agreements. The rent stays the same, but I've added a clause about respectful communication between tenants and management. Tracy's laugh came out brittle. You can't be serious. Completely. I folded my hands. See, I believe respect should go both ways. You'll sign these today if you wish to continue living there. Joan whispered, you planned this. I met her eyes evenly. No. You did. I just took notes. Their hands trembled as they looked at the contracts. Luke wasn't there to mediate this time. It was just us, their pride, my patience, and the truth between. The roles had reversed. And it was exactly as it should be. After the meeting, I stepped outside into the winter sunlight. The air smelled of rain and freedom. Behind me, Tracy's voice rose, half anger, half disbelief. I didn't turn back. My lawyer followed, carrying the signed documents. Everything's official, he said. They'll either behave or move. I nodded. Either is fine. That afternoon, I returned to my office downtown. The phone rang constantly, contractors, bankers, and now, reporters who had caught wind of the property transfers. I kept my tone calm. No comment, I said each time. But by evening, the story had already spread. I poured a glass of wine, watching twilight spill over the city. Tomorrow, the rest of Charleston would know what Joan and Tracy had learned today. I wasn't the maid. I was the landlord. By morning, the local paper ran the headline, "Former teacher turned property mogul buys family-owned estates." My picture, professional and poised, was printed beneath. The calls came fast. Some congratulated, some questioned. I didn't care. I sat at my desk reading the article's last line, "Residents, including her own in-laws, now rent from her." That sentence tasted like justice and irony blended together. I thought about the first Thanksgiving, the laughter, the sting. Now the story had flipped. People in town whispered. Joan refused to answer her phone. Tracy's social media went silent. Luke came home late that evening, paper in hand, face pale. "You never told me," he said. "You never asked," I answered quietly. He sank into a chair, struggling between pride and shock. "You own their house." "Ours," I corrected softly. "And many others." He shook his head. "I don't even know who you are anymore." I smiled sadly. "Then maybe it's time you learn." Joan called a family meeting the next weekend. When I arrived, every face looked tight and rehearsed. The dining room was too quiet. "We just want to clear the air," Joan began. "This whole thing has embarrassed the family." I took the seat at the head of the table, the one she used to occupy. "You wanted me at the back before," I said gently. "Now you'll listen." No one spoke. I laid out new lease forms and community projects I was funding for tenants who needed help. "This is what respect looks like," I said. "Responsibility with compassion." Tracy's lips curled. "You think you're better than us?" I met her gaze. "No. Just wiser." The room felt small, their world suddenly smaller still. For once, no one made a joke. They just watched as the maid gave orders. Luke found me in the gallery the next morning holding a small box of business cards. He looked like someone who had walked through fog, and then realized the road behind him had vanished. "You never told me about any of this," he said, voice thin. I set the cards down and turned to face him. "You never asked," I said softly. He ran a hand through his hair, the same movement he made when he was nervous at family dinners. "I thought you worked late shifts. I thought you liked quiet." I let out a breath. I do like quiet. I also like doing things properly. He sat on the edge of a chair like he might fall into it. "I don't know how to be in your life now," he admitted. His words were honest and small, like a child who lost a toy. "Then learn," I said. "Or get out." He flinched as if the words hurt him, and I felt a pinch of guilt. But I also felt something else, relief. For years I had let him navigate the room, while I climbed stairs no one saw. He had been content to let me handle the heavy work while he kept the polite face. Now, suddenly, that balance changed. He looked at the cards again. "Your name is all over this," he said. "How long have you been doing it?" "A long time," I answered. "Long enough to know what I want." He opened his mouth, closed it. "I married you thinking I knew you," he said. "I'm not sure I do." I walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You do," I said. "You just need to let me be the kind of person I am. If you can't accept that, then we have different futures." He stared at my hand, then at me, then back at the business cards. That night the house felt like it had shifted on its foundation. I didn't want to break him, but I also wouldn't shrink. The truth is sharp and kind by itself. You do not have to make it mean. Joan called a neighborhood meeting the next week like a captain trying to steady a ship. The living room filled with faces I had known since Luke's childhood, neighbors who once waved and now kept their distance. I arrived and sat where guests usually sat, but Joan had set me a place at the end like a footnote. I slid into the chair, and watched her try to pull everyone into a plan to regain control. She spoke fast, words like arrows. "We must show them we are a good family," she said. Her voice trembled under the weight of shame she did not know how to name. I listened and then stood. "I'm here," I said, "to listen and to outline changes." They looked at me as if I had shifted into a shape they did not recognize. I explained the new lease terms I had put in place, fair rental rates, clear maintenance timelines, and required respectful behavior in the community. I spoke slowly so they could understand. "This is not punishment," I said. "It's accountability." Tracy scoffed at first. "You think you can tell us how to behave in our own homes?" she snapped. I looked at her and felt no heat, only a long calm. "Your home is mine on paper, but it was also your home long before I signed anything. I want to make sure people living here are safe and treated with respect." The room shifted. A few neighbors nodded, relief softened their faces. Others stayed quiet, unsure how to change old habits. Luke stood in the doorway, watching, the lines around his mouth deeper than before. He finally took a step forward. "You did well," he whispered. Privately, he said he was proud. Publicly, he kept still. The evening closed with coffee cups and slow conversation. I left knowing I had put a clear edge between who I was and who I would not be again. I held a town hall later that month, not as a show but as a promise. Tenants came, some angry, some tired, most wary. I listened to stories about landlords who never fixed broken heaters and managers who ignored calls. I made notes and promised action. "We will set up a fund to help families in sudden need," I told them. "We will offer classes on budgeting and tenants' rights. We will answer calls within 24 hours. Their faces changed from folded into pockets of worry to something softer, hope. The look in Joan's eyes when she attended that meeting was small and complicated. She came to see what I meant by respect, and that took courage. I explained the clause in the lease that asked tenants to treat management and neighbors with dignity. It was not about policing language, but about creating a safe space for everyone. I shared stories of landlords who had torn families apart with greed, and I told them how I had seen this in my work and wanted to stop it. People asked questions I expected and some I did not. A woman named Rose with 2 kids asked if there would be a job training list. I handed her my phone with names of contractors and employers. She cried quietly, and I felt my own throat tighten. The meeting ended with handshakes and a few surprised smiles. News spread about the Home First policies I would fund. I sat later with my lawyer and wrote the first checks for the fund. It felt right to build something that healed. I had started this work for myself, but its power grew when it became for others too. Tracy exploded one afternoon like steam from a pressure cooker. She stormed into my gallery while I was cataloging a set of small chairs, her voice loud in the quiet room. "You embarrassed us publicly," she shouted, hands on hips. Her face was red, fury had hollowed it out. I set down my notes and looked at her calmly. "No," I said. "You embarrassed yourselves." Her mouth opened and closed. "How could you do this? You lied to us. You used us." I folded my arms. "I used documents and law to protect people who needed homes. You used me for laughs." She lunged toward me, fingers pointed. "You made us look foolish." "Good," I said, and my voice did not shake. "Maybe now you will learn to measure your words." She spat out a list of grievances, family honor, public shame, the way I had overstepped. I listened. I answered only when the breath left her chest, and she could not speak faster. This was never about being cruel, I told her. It was about balance. You mocked me for being who I was, and then you were surprised when I became the person who could change the rules. She scoffed, voice hoarse. You think you've won? I smiled in a way that was not smug. I don't want to win like that. I want to change things so people won't be prey to careless landlords again. She left with the last word bawled like a child denied candy. The gallery felt empty in the way a room feels after a storm passes, cleared but raw. Joan stormed out of the house one night, slamming the door so hard the pictures on the wall shook. Luke called after her, but she did not come back. He sat at the kitchen table and watched me with pain in his eyes. "She says you did this to ruin the family," he said quietly. I boiled water for tea and sat across from him. "I did this to protect tenants and to teach one lesson," I answered. "I tried to be fair. I offered help." He rubbed his face. "She says you took everything." "I took what was legally available," I said. "I kept them in the house by offering stable leases and maintenance. I made them sign agreements because respect must have rules." Luke's hand shook when he reached for his cup. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I don't know if I can be married to someone who doesn't want to hide anymore." My chest tightened. I had loved him for his easy kindness, but love that needs hiding is not love. "Then we are at a crossroads," I said. "I won't ask you to change overnight. But I will not be small again." He nodded and leaned back, eyes wet. The house seemed quieter, drained of its old comforts. The next day, Joan called and asked for a meeting. I agreed. She arrived with a face softened by shame. "I can't keep being proud and cruel," she said. We talked for hours, speaking slowly and sometimes not at all, but the rocking of conversation moved something between us. Months later, I launched the HomeStart initiative, a program I had sketched on napkins and tested in late-night calls. It offered tenants equity shares, low-interest repair loans, and workshops. The first event was small, maybe 20 people, but the smiles were large. I stood at the front and felt like someone planting a tree, whose shade I might not sit under. Luke came and helped hand out flyers, nervous but present. The Jenkins family stood up and told the room how the program had kept them from losing their home. People clapped. I felt a warmth that was not revenge but repair. I thought of Margaret, my mentor in business, and imagined she would have smiled. I had taken the pain of being belittled and turned it into policy. The community began to notice. Local news did a short piece about HomeStart. Donations started coming in. Tracy called one night, voice small. "We can't keep up, can we renegotiate?" she asked. I made a decision to offer them a path, financial counseling, a payment plan, and a requirement to attend a homeowners respect class. "Yes," I said slowly. "As long as you call me by my name this time." Her voice cracked. "We'll do it." She sounded like someone picking up a heavy but useful tool. I hung up and sat in the quiet of the office, thinking how strange and good it felt to build bridges rather than burn them. A few months later, Tracy called crying. She had lost a job temporarily and panicked. "We can't keep up the payments," she said, voice small and frayed. "What will happen?" I listened and offered a payment plan and counseling. She asked quietly, "Are you angry?" I thought of all the dinners where her jokes had cut like small knives. I thought of Joan's proud face softened with regret. "I'm disappointed," I said honestly. "But I'm not cruel." She sobbed softly and then said, "I never realized how much I use people." Her words were raw and young. I told her the plan and the class schedule for the homeowner respect course. "You'll need to come," I said. "Not because I enjoy forcing you, but because it will help." She agreed. Over time, she sent short messages about job shifts and small victories. The tone changed slowly like a season turning. I felt a soft relief when she learned to pay a bill on time, and when she brought her mother soup when Joan was sick. I did not forget the old jokes, but I let them rest. People can grow when given rules and care. That belief guided my choices more than a desire for revenge ever did. Luke sat me down one evening with his hands folded like someone asking for permission. "You were never beneath them," he said. "I was the one who was weak." His voice was full of remorse and tenderness. I looked at him and remembered small moments, his hand under the table, the way he laughed too loudly when he was nervous. "You can start being brave now," I said. He looked surprised, as if someone had handed him a map he had always wanted but never dared to read. Over the next months, he tried. He went to meetings with me and learned tenants' names. He listened to stories without judgment and sometimes, meekly, apologized to people he had once ignored. Our marriage shifted into a partnership that felt fair. We argued sometimes, and some nights we went to bed with a silence that hurt, but overall there was a new balance. I could not pretend nothing had changed. We had both changed. We had walked through a fire of family drama, and come out with different clothes. I found that the work of building a life with someone is not about hiding parts of yourself, but about inviting someone in, and watching if they stay. Luke stayed, mostly. Sometimes people do surprise you when you give them the space to grow. The balance we rebuilt lasted almost a year before the cracks returned. Luke's pride couldn't breathe in the same room as my success. He grew quiet, then sharp, then cold. The final argument came one evening, when I was reviewing contracts for a new housing project. "You're married to your work," he said. "You make me feel small." I set down my pen and looked at him. "I spent years being small so you could feel big," I said gently. "Now you can choose to grow or walk away." He stared at me like a stranger. "I can't," he whispered. "Not like this." Divorce papers came 2 months later, signed quietly, without shouting. When I left the courthouse, I felt both hollow and light. My lawyer asked if I wanted to change my last name. "No," I said. "I'll keep it. It reminds me of what I survived." The day I moved into my new townhouse, I unpacked only one photo, me, standing outside my first property with paint on my hands and hope in my heart. The loneliness that followed wasn't sharp, it was clean. I had finally made space in my life for peace, and I wasn't going to fill it with regret. The company grew faster than I expected. Within a year, Davenport Holdings became known beyond Charleston. Journalists called me the woman who rebuilt respect into real estate. When they asked what inspired me, I always smiled. "A Thanksgiving dinner that changed everything," I said. They laughed, thinking it was a joke. But for me, that dinner had been the spark. The HomeStart initiative expanded to 5 cities. I trained local managers, funded new housing programs, and helped families buy their first homes. I spent long nights drafting plans and longer mornings meeting people whose stories mirrored mine, overlooked, underestimated, quietly strong. The press wrote about my success like it was magic. It wasn't. It was math, memory, and patience. Every signature on a contract was another step away from that kitchen where Tracy once laughed and called me the maid. I didn't want to erase that memory, I wanted to outgrow it. Power, I learned, isn't about control. It's about choice, and I finally had plenty of that. 3 years later, a letter came from Joan. Her handwriting was uneven but familiar. "We'd like to make peace. Please come for Thanksgiving. Just family. No press, no tension." I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to toss it away, but curiosity won. When I arrived that afternoon, the house looked smaller. The walls needed paint. The laughter was softer, humbler. Joan greeted me at the door with damp eyes. "Elena," she said quietly, "thank you for coming." Tracy appeared behind her, wringing her hands. "We just wanted to talk. To say we're sorry." I nodded, unsure of my own heart. The table was already set, 3 plates, simple food, no extra show. I sat down, realizing how time had melted the edges of my anger. This wasn't the same family. And I wasn't the same woman. We ate in the same dining room where I'd once stood, invisible and trembling. Now, Joan placed me at the head of the table. "You should sit there," she said. Tracy whispered under her breath, "She really owns the place." I met her eyes. Yes. And I finally own my peace too. We began the meal in silence until Joan spoke. I used to think respect was something owed to me, she said. Now I know it's something earned. I nodded, my chest tight. I used to think forgiveness was weakness, I said. But it's strength. Tracy smiled faintly. You taught us that. I smiled back. The meal was simple, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, pie, but it tasted better than any feast before it. I realized revenge had turned into something else, balance. As I left that evening, Joan hugged me. You taught us humility, she whispered. I answered softly, and you taught me confidence. So, I suppose we're even. The following spring, a clip of my keynote speech at a community forum went viral. I stood before a crowd of young women and spoke from the truth I'd earned. Never let someone's lack of vision make you question your value, I said. The video spread faster than I expected. Messages poured in from people who had been belittled by family, by bosses, by partners. They called me brave, but I wasn't brave. I was tired of being small. I replied to as many as I could, writing, you can rise quietly. Power doesn't need applause. I didn't build a company to prove them wrong anymore. I built it to show others what's possible when you stop waiting for permission. Fame never interested me, but impact did. Seeing people believe in themselves again, that was the sweetest kind of justice. The next Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner at my own home. Joan and Tracy arrived early, carrying dishes they'd made themselves. No servants, no jokes, no sideways glances, just gratitude. After the meal, Joan took my hand. I've learned something, she said softly. Pride is heavy. Respect is light. Thank you for showing me the difference. I smiled. And thank you for showing me where I stood so I could learn to rise. We laughed together, genuinely this time. It felt strange and healing. Tracy helped clean the dishes without being asked. We talked about her new job managing rentals for another company. She had changed too, humbled, honest, a little stronger. That night, as I walked them to their car, Joan turned back and said, You've built something good, Elena. I watched their taillights fade and felt warmth fill the spaces where bitterness used to live. At the next charity gala, I raised a glass before the crowd. My speech was simple. To family, the ones who see you, and the ones who make you see yourself. The room fell quiet, some nodding, some smiling. I spotted Joan and Tracy at a back table, clapping with real pride. I thought of Luke, far away now, remarried and happy. There was no anger left between us. Just history. My company banner hung behind me, lit softly in gold, HomeStart, where every home begins with dignity. The applause swelled, but I didn't crave it. What filled me was the peace of knowing I had rewritten my own story, and no one could take the pen from my hand again. That night, as the crowd left and the music faded, I stood by the window of my office, city lights flickering like small hopes. I thought about that first Thanksgiving, the laughter, the sting, the silence I had swallowed. I thought about every person who had called me the maid. And I smiled. My voice, soft but certain, echoed in my mind, they called me the maid. So I cleaned house, not out of spite, but to make room for self-respect. I turned off the lights, locking the door behind me. The hall smelled faintly of new paint and fresh beginnings. Outside, the air was cool and full of promise. Justice, I realized, isn't loud. It's steady. It's choosing peace after pain, strength after shame. And as I walked to my car, heels clicking against the pavement, I knew the story was no longer about revenge. It was about becoming the woman who never needed to be small again. If you think she earned her revenge, hit subscribe for more stories like this, where dignity always wins.